Hey, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone. We welcome you to today's meeting on leads, as well as it's actually hosted by the Solar Village SDG CEO, Nilmini. And Nilmini, welcome to this meeting. And I hope it is a very important topic that's been discussed about why women and children come first in relation to making the development sustainable.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. The slides are numerous, and so the discussion is going to be quite thick, dense in content. So please bear with me. Sustainable development. Why is it that we should prioritize women and children's issues? That's the question that I hope we can find the answer to by the end of this session. First of all, women and children first, that term comes from the Birkenhead drill. When the HMS Birkenhead was about to go down underwater in 1852, the officers commanded the soldiers to ensure that women and children could be lowered to the lifeboats first. And there is a reason for that. Um, let's discover why we should prioritize women and children. First of all, just a little overview of the session. Um, these are the questions that I'd like to look at as we go through the session. First of all, what's sustainable development? What are the UN's SDGs? Whereabouts is Sri Lanka in all of this? And what are the women's issues in Sri Lanka? And what are the children's issues in Sri Lanka? Why should we prioritize women and children in the context of sustainable development? So first of all, sustainable development, it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. You'll see that the UN has identified 17 sustainable developmental goals. And these are here in this slide. You'll see no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education for all, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, etc. So these SDGs, investment in the SDGs is a cost-effective resilience building strategy because it addresses the economic, social, and environmental challenges simultaneously. They have identified 6 key transitions to implement the SDGs, and these are food systems, energy access and affordability, digital connectivity, education, jobs and social protection, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. These will have catalytic effects, provided we focus on those 6 areas that will help implement the 17 SDGs. So, what are global women's issues? Women are concerned with equality and empowerment. They have to juggle work and the home. Access to education is an issue for women, women's health issues, safety, gender-based violence and persecution, representation in politics. But in Sri Lanka, one of the most important issues, to my mind, is labor force participation or the lack of it for women. There are many constitutional guarantees because in the Constitution it says nothing in this Article 12.4 shall prevent special provision being made by law, subordinate legislation, and executive action for the advancement of women, children, disabled persons. There are lots of legislative guarantees, but the question is, are they implemented? In some parts of the world, girls and women have none of these rights, including the right to life, and they don't have the right to work at all. But in Sri Lanka, there are certain things that are of particular concern. In 2023, the poverty rates continued to rise. This is following the financial crisis. But labor force participation has also declined among women. And this is due to the closure of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises as a consequence of both the financial crisis and the pandemic. And so households are grappling with multiple pressures because of loss of income, underemployment, and the high prices, including in food. So how do we improve labor force participation? This is something that was looked at by this lady, Upeksha Vimalavira. She found that over half of the population of Sri Lanka are women, and yet the female labor force participation is alarmingly low at about 31.3% in 2023. This is alarming because we've got an aging population and fertility rate is low. And so, as a consequence, if we deprive 2/3 of the female population from being active in the economy, then that can only spell trouble for the future. So, looking at these figures, you can see how female labor force participation has gone up and down quite a bit since before the year 2000. And it's very low currently. This particular study by Nilmini is of particular interest, and it's well worth reading this. The lady on the right that I've picked out the image of, she's one of the first Sri Lankan women to obtain an engineering degree from Memorial University in Canada. I just pulled her out because it's such a rare commodity when it shouldn't be. Engineering is a predominantly male-dominated area of work and study. And in 2025, we shouldn't be speaking of just one Sri Lankan woman gaining a degree from that particular university. But this study by Nilmini Gunawardena, Professor Gunawardena, you'll see that she says that Sri Lanka has a long record of gender equality in education enrollment and high female completion rates of the studies. But it's got very low and stagnant female labor force participation. So it remains a puzzle why Sri Lanka has been unable to translate its high girls' education gains into female labor force participation. Because women's achievements in studies in higher education is on a par and often higher than men's. And yet they're not represented in the workforce. So she looks at the clues as to where the answers are. And she wonders whether the gender differences in skill acquisition could have implications for education policy. And she looks at the differences in the way the labor market values identical skills in men and women, with implications for labor market policy interventions, or in the gender division of labor in the household, which has implications for family-friendly and social policies. Just briefly looking at each of them in turn. Skills acquisition. There are certain subjects that boys are encouraged to do, whilst girls are encouraged to do certain soft types of subjects. So that's something that we can look at. I talked about that soul lady engineer. Perhaps we should be encouraging more girls to go into the maths and science and engineering technology type, the STEM subjects. And also the way that the labor market values equal skills in men and women. In the workforce, if a woman is quite ambitious, that's seen as something quite negative. And um, they're seen as the conciliators, not the leaders. So that's something that's worthwhile looking at closely and encouraging employers to gradually adjust their approach to women in the workplace. And even within households, the division of labor, women have traditionally been seen as the carers. They are expected to give up their work and focus on raising the children. There might be less support from the man in the house because he's considered to be the provider. And so you've got that imbalance within the household, and women often care for the husband's parents as well, which then reduces their ability to earn and become financially independent on the one hand, but also their ability to contribute to the household coffers. So this lack of women in work, it's quite worrying. I think of it as a bit of a time bomb for that very reason that I mentioned earlier, which is you've got an economy that needs to grow, and yet 2/3 of its human resources are kept very much suppressed. We've got some archaic labor laws in the country, which control, for example, nighttime working for women. It's well intended to protect women, um, but rather than focusing on protecting women from that end, the better thing to do would be to actually ensure that women have a safe environment where they can actually engage in nighttime work if they wish to, and also travel to work. There are some things that the government could do to try and lessen the impact on women, and that is um, things like indirect taxation, like VAT or the special commodity levy, which will impact female-led households that are struggling. So these impact the poor more. Also, representation in parliament. Women are very poorly represented in parliament in some countries of the world. And although these figures go back to 2019, you'll see how Sri Lanka was sandwiched somewhere between Iran and Kuwait at 5.3% for a very long time. Thankfully, this has improved. Since last year, with the elections, 24 women were elected to the country's parliament, which means that women's representation in parliament has gone from 5.3 to 10.7. We've still got a long way to go. And the current prime minister got the second highest preferential votes in the history of Sri Lankan elections. So there's hope, but there's still a long way to go. So it's with some of these issues in mind that we formed Solar Village SDG, a community interest company, just a few months ago, under a year ago, because we wanted to promote renewable energy uptake in Sri Lanka. And you'll remember that's one of the key transitions is clean energy and affordable energy. And also that we wanted to create lasting income generation methods for sustainable development. And it's to empower people, particularly the rural communities, because the vast amount of struggle, is in the rural communities where not only women, but farmers, they're struggling, and much of the population is in the rural communities. So it's with that in mind, I just paused the discussion just to remind everybody that we're trying to raise some funds to help with this sustainable developmental work by working on um, some solar villages that we hope to put in place. And we're doing a fundraiser on the 2nd of November. It's really important if you wish to participate to please to register from now. There's a QR code here, and you can then join in with a team of your own or as an individual to reach out and fundraise, because to do anything, we need funds. And so this is a good way of raising some funds because we want to put in at least a couple of solar villages to bring renewable energy to those deprived rural communities, but also put in place some pilot schemes for the sustainable developmental work. So this is, you'd need to go to this particular website to register, and then you would reach out to your friends, colleagues, relatives for sponsorship. If for whatever reason you're not able to join us on that day, we'd ask you to use this donate button and sponsor your favorite team or a favorite individual on there. That's just a little aside to say that we are trying to do work to try and improve the lot of people in the rural communities. I want to move on to this topic now of gender-based violence for women as an issue. Physical health and safety is so important, and so is psychological health. And when you have gender-based violence, both can be harmed, including emotional health. In South Asia, in particular, the problems for women, girls, are things like early marriage, forced marriage, honor killings, and other harmful cultural practices like FGM, emotional abuse, human trafficking, and period poverty. There are lots and lots of conventions that Sri Lanka has signed up to, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was something that we signed up to back in the early 80s. And there are many other conventions, but and also the Constitution, as you said earlier as well, guarantees non-discrimination on the basis of your gender and many other um, uh, elements. But whatever guarantees the Constitution and conventions provide, and even the legislation provides, the domestic legislation, if there's no will to implement that, if justice is failing because of delays or whatever the reason, or lack of will on the part of the enforcement agencies, then all of these things become meaningless. Another key issue for women in Sri Lanka is sexual harassment in public places, because 90% of females have reported, following this 2019 study, that they have been victims of sexual harassment in buses and trains, at least once in their lifetime. This is quite a serious issue. Most women can wander around the public transport in the UK without any fear. I say most because it's not impossible for this sort of thing to happen even in the UK. But 90%, it's a huge proportion of women who would feel unsafe to travel by public transport. That's incredibly worrying. How can women contribute to the family or the economy if they can't get to work and back safely? The answer is surely not about night shift laws, which are quite paternalistic, but we need punitive laws with teeth. that create a safe environment for women. So if it's outlawed for anybody to harass women in public transport, and it's implemented strictly, then women would be safe. That's where the resources need to go into, and that's where the attention needs to go into, not preventing women from working, not forcing employers to get permission from the Commissioner of Labour to employ women at night, but make it safe for them first. If you look at even the Sri Lankan police, women officers have reported discrimination, harassment, including sexual harassment, lack of promotions, being forced into doing desk duties because that's what women should be doing rather than being on the front line, being denied opportunities, and some of the male colleagues' attitudes, which are sometimes paternalistic, sometimes patronizing, and sometimes even contemptuous towards women officers. If even women in the police force are being subject to this sort of thing, can you imagine in general civil society what women have to endure in the workplace? The Women's Wellbeing Survey of 2019 looked at violence against women, and they have an account of an anecdotal account of a woman who'd been married for 10 years, and during that time she'd faced everything. She'd been raped by her husband, because it isn't unlawful for a husband to force a woman to have sex. She'd been thrown into a well. She'd been forced to abort against her own will twice. And she wasn't allowed to interact with her own friends and family. And she even had to look after another woman her husband had impregnated during his many affairs. But despite this, for 35 years, this woman had suffered in silence. This is horrendous, but this sort of thing is not, I'm not saying that all of these things would happen to every single woman, but it's not uncommon for women to grin and bear it. And quite a lot of the time, it's because they're financially dependent on the man. They have no choice. They have no choice of escaping that. If you look at the statistics, nearly 40%, 2 in 5 women, have experienced physical, sexual, emotional, and/or economic violence and/or controlling behavior by their partners in their lifetime. One of the most common forms of violence is controlling behavior, which is almost 20%, 19.1%, which means women lack agency to be able to take decisions regarding their own lives. Physical violence is the second most common form of violence against women at 18.9%. This means 1 in 5 women. So violence against women and girls are driven by societal norms and attitudes that inhibit women from even talking about these things. These harmful practices are not disrupted because women think it's part of their lot. And some women, almost 40% of women, agree with statements like women are obliged to have sex with their husbands when she doesn't feel like it. Or over a third, 35.3% of women agreed that men can have a good reason to hit their wives. That's appalling. And more than 1/3, 35.7% of women who experience physical or sexual violence by a partner have had suicidal thoughts. Women's health and safety in relation to Sri Lanka, these are the kind of issues that are prevalent. Early marriage, forced marriage, harmful cultural practices, emotional abuse, human trafficking, period poverty. Male guardianship system in some cultures within Sri Lankan society is quite oppressive because it entrenches a gender-based discrimination in most aspects of family life, within marriage, divorce, child custody, inheritance, because the male guardian has power over all those decisions. Children, in terms of women and children first, let's look at children. Early marriage. The legal age for marriage for girls in some countries is 13, and fathers can give permission for their daughters to be married off even at a younger age. And in some countries, customary practices make early marriage very normal. The marriage of girls, children, mean that their health and their lives could be put at risk because they may become mothers while they themselves are still children. If you have a look at this particular report by one of our directors, Saroj Patharina, The Wounded Victims of Sri Lanka's Child Marriage Law, you'll get an idea of how the Islamic laws, community laws, enable much younger Muslim girls to be married off. The law that governs marriages between Muslims is the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act of 1951. This means that the general law is not necessarily applied to Muslims. It doesn't treat men and women as equal partners in a marriage. And a male guardian signs for that marriage contract. Even in divorce, the man can unilaterally and without giving notice divorce the wife. The minimum age for marriage under the general law of the land is 18. But under the Muslim laws relating to marriage and divorce, a girl below the age of 12 could be registered in a marriage. So there's no minimum age for girls. This is a law of 1951, which is now almost 75 years old, way out of date. Obviously, because it relates to a particular section of the community, there's a little bit of reluctance to interfere. But this is a form of child abuse because the children, even younger than 12, little girls can be forced into marriage. And that means they can be forced into having sex and bearing children. The Penal Code of Sri Lanka doesn't recognize marital rape as an offense. That means a child under the age of 16 could be forced into this situation. And that means a child below the age of 12 So why should women and children go first? If you look at this European Investment Bank study, the economic power of gender equality, they talked not only about prosperity and social cohesion, competitiveness, geopolitical stability, etc., through gender equality. But it's not just a matter of equity, it's of paramount economic importance. Research from the International Monetary Fund suggests that narrowing the gender gap in labor markets could increase GDP in emerging markets and developing economies by almost 8%. The gains from fully closing the gender gap could be even higher, lifting GDP in those countries by 23% on average. Just think what a difference it could make in a country like Sri Lanka if we do close the gender gap, if more women are able to participate in the labor force, Sri Lankan economy could really take off. So going back to violence against children, this policy brief is well worth reading. Back in 2022, the UNICEF regional director for South Asia said children need to be placed squarely at the heart of the solution as the country works to resolve the crisis, referring to the financial crisis. And continuity of learning must be ensured for girls and boys of all ages so they can prepare for their future and are shielded from the threats of child labor, exploitation, and gender-based violence. And health services must be prioritized to protect women and children against life-threatening diseases and malnutrition. Malnutrition was a severe problem, and it still is in some parts of Sri Lanka. It's better, but it hasn't left us completely. This NWG network post mentions that there were 161 incidents of violence against children in January 2025 in Sri Lanka. 52 cases of child abuse, with neglect being one of the most prevalent. Sexual abuse was reported as 14 cases. And not just girls, but both girls and boys are affected by this. UNICEF said that you need much more child protection personnel. And they said that you need families and schools to help change attitudes to societal norms. Most importantly, Sri Lanka lacks a national child protection framework. And this is really important for policymakers to take on board. As a nation, Sri Lanka serves as a destination for trafficked individuals, including vulnerable children, who are forced into labor and commercial sexual exploitation. So there are many child trafficking instances that are still unreported. They're trafficked to cities for domestic work and sexual exploitation. That's according to Save the Children. And then you have this UNICEF study who talked about school nutrition. That's actually some positive news there in July 2025 from this study. There are a couple of charities, UK-based, that are doing some wonderful work for the protection of children. Their Future Today, founded by Lynn Stanier, for example, they're trying to take children out of institutions. They've been working really hard since the tsunami time because 21,000 children, over 21,000 children, are living in orphanages in Sri Lanka without any hope of a family, an education, or a future. Dr. Tush Vikramanayake has been doing some wonderful work in relation to the corporal punishment of children through her organization, Stop Child Cruelty Trust, because there still seems to be an attitude of a good hiding will sort a child out. It's about punishment rather than disciplining a child. It's about punishment. And some of the physical punishment can be very damaging and the effects can be irrevocable. It's a form of very serious form of child abuse. The attitudes are still very, very archaic. And Tush has found it very difficult because in her struggle, to make it unlawful, to make corporal punishment in schools, especially unlawful, she found a lot of resistance because, well, that's how I was brought up. Didn't do me any harm. That seems to be the approach of even some judges. So women and children first. I don't believe that sustainable development can be achieved without prioritizing women and children's issues. This report from the World Bank Group of April 2025, it's got some encouraging news about how Sri Lanka is doing. But household incomes, employment, non-monetary welfare remain well below pre-crisis levels. And they say mid-term growth and poverty reduction prospects hinge on continued macroeconomic stability and successful implementation of structural reforms, e.g., on trade, investment, and note here, female labor force participation as being key. So why put women and children first? Because the future of Sri Lanka depends on it. That's all I wanted to say. If you want to open the floor for a discussion now, please do, Chula.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for that very elaborate discussion because the you highlighted particularly the areas that we didn't know, the legal weaknesses that is there in our country, in the system itself. And I'm happy to acknowledge that someone who can do something, listen to this, is, and also I must congratulate Professor Laxman Disanaka, who is now the Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya. And the University of Peradeniya is the biggest university in Sri Lanka with 9 faculties and more than 50% women learning there. So if he's willing to, I should give him the first choice and then Professor Dharma next. Lakshmi. Yeah, Kitsiri, I'll get you in a minute.
Okay. Okay, Chula, thank you. I will switch off the video. Thank you for your kind words and
Video is
introducing.
gone off. Video was on earlier.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your appreciation and your kind words. Yes, I'm the present Chancellor of Peradeniya University. And there is one coincidence, maybe. At present, in the Sri Lankan university system, there are 3 physics emeritus professors who are chancellors of 3 universities. Peradeniya, myself, Jaffna, recently appointed Professor Kumaravadive, my batchmate at Peradeniya, physics special batch, first batch at Peradeniya, and Professor Dhammika Tantrigoda, Open University of Sri Lanka, also from Peradeniya physics special batch, 2 years younger to me. I think Dharmi knows well. So there are 3 physics professors currently, chancellors of universities in Peradeniya. Right. Thank you, Chula. So it's an honorary job. Only 2 days, 2 days of work per year, convocation. Otherwise, I enjoy the position. Thank you. And shall I take a few minutes for to answer some issues Nilmini raised?
Please, Lakshman,
Okay.
because it will be
Yeah.
very relevant.
Just 3-4 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Nilmini. I thought I was listening to a similar talk 10 years back or 20 years back. The issues are same, has not changed much. Okay, let me go through one by one. I jot down randomly. Nilmini, it's still a male-dominant world. Whether you like it or not, you take the globally, it's a male-dominant world. So there is a baseline. And actually, the women's role, it's not only a dual role in a house or in the society, it's a multiple role women has to carry out in our society. So there are some highlights uh, I have noticed in our universities during the recent last 10 years or so. There's an increase in the number of female students. For example, if you take geology, there are 20 students now. 15 are females in geology. They are climbing rocks and moving in forests and all that. And also in my own department, Peradeniya Physics department, during our time, our batches, first few batches, didn't have any girls, and now it's a 15 per year they are taking for the physics special course. Out of the 15, at least 7, 8 are girls. Okay, so in general, in the university system in Sri Lanka, I think there's an increase in the female student population. In the workplace, why, especially the private sector, is reluctant to hire females? There are restrictions imposed by the our society. I mean the system. Mainly the transport. After hours transport after 6 or 7 p.m. are very few, limited, and also girls wants to go home early due to many reasons. So that is one of the reasons private sector especially is a bit reluctant to hire females. I don't know in other countries the situation. And I have noticed, to take the overall picture, females officers, if you take accountants, bursars in our system, they are the least corrupted as a population, least corrupted in these positions compared to men. And we are going through a similar issue at University of Peradeniya, one of the bursars. And in general, during the economic crisis we had a few years back, so there was a limitation to the employment, I mean, overall. So when the employment opportunities increases, it's the male who get the priority due to the reasons I mentioned. Male gets the priority. So still the situation is relatively the same. So unless the economy improves and more opportunities are available, I think the situation will remain the same. I noticed one thing in India, for example. Now the present consulate means number two. The ambassador is in Colombo. Consulate is in Kandy. She is, I forgot the name. She is a very young engineer. You know, very interesting, very active. She visited NIFS 2 3 times. Young engineer, not much senior, maybe 5 years of experience after graduation. Very active, very knowledgeable, politically and technologically. So this is one reason I see in the case of India, the ladies are on par kind of with male counterparts when it comes to technology education. And China, I think, same or much better maybe. So these are some of the observations that I made, Nilmini. Mm, so thank you very much for highlighting these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for Lakshman for that broad view and also enlightening us. And then let's hope we can make progress on that. And congratulations again for your position and the recognition.
Thank you.
And I will. I have two more people waiting to question. Professor Dharme and Kisri. Professor Dharme, yes, Professor Dharme.
Right. Thank you, Chula. Thank you, Nilmini, for a nice presentation. I already congratulated Lakshman before. So, in fact, I noted the first comment on education. I think Lakshman touched it. Lakshman was the first batch, didn't have any girls in the batch. I was later in 1975 in my batch, there were 12 people. only 2 girls. And later, when I visited Peradeniya, 8% of the batch was girls. So education-wise, things have improved. I don't know about the workforce. Second comment I want to make is you mentioned that the women uh, labor force in the country is low, but the women workforce in the Middle East has gone up, mainly because the ladies, because of poverty, went outside to work. But what has happened? I heard that the one of the main income was the first or the second, perhaps, income was coming from these ladies. What have our ladies, what have our people done with this money, with this income? Some husbands wasted that money drinking and wasting their effort. That is minority, perhaps. But what have our rulers done? They have used that money for their own benefits, to have a good life, to buy luxury cars, to refurbish their accommodation in Colombo. And that is how they use that money. These people went to Middle East because of poverty. Have they at least used the fraction of that money for alleviation of poverty in the country? No. How can we develop? And if you look at the problems, our children, they are growing without mother's love. Is that going to help us in the future? That is going to create more problems in the future for us. So we have to think about very seriously. I hope the new government will think about it and do something positive to do this. What we should do is we should keep all these mothers and sisters in the country, in their homes with children. We should empower them. That is what we do in our Solar Village project, small at the small scale. And also, you know that very well, when we have a village community, we have a VDC, Village Development Committee, we insist that 50% of the members should be a female. You, uh, we know the reasons. So these are the issues we need to think about. This. I hope things will gradually improve. One other point I want to mention, perhaps Kitsiri or Lakshman or Ranjan will comment on this. When I visit Sri Lanka these days, when you drive along the um, roads, you can see these massage parlors. I don't know that I can't remember there is a word, two letter word. Kitsiri, can you remember the word? Or
Spa,
Lakshman,
spa,
Ranjan?
spa,
Spa,
SPA.
spa,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
SPA, spa,
Fast.
spas
Yeah, yeah.
everywhere. I
Mushroom,
was
mushroom.
driving,
Yeah.
they are mushrooming along the roads.
Spa.
And in fact, in these things, what people say is they are bringing girls from rural areas and they are exploiting them. So how can we develop like this? We are talking about sustainable development. These things are very serious for the society, and people need to look at it. And the new government hopefully look into these serious issues and look at these spas, what is happening inside all these spas. You every 50 yards there is a spa in some roads. I was driving along the Kalawat area. You can count so many spas around the road. So somebody can perhaps Ranjan or Kitsiri could comment on this. I will stop there. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Dharme. The only way to get it going is to bring it to light, like what you are doing now, and then do further things to uh, move it forward. And that is why it's important to bring it up, at least here, so we can work on it. Yes, I've got Kitsiri next and then Ranjan. Kitsiri, yes, Kitsiri.
Dr. Ra, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, I also have to thank Ms. Nilmini for nice presentation. Actually, I like to propose that this presentation must go to the knowledge of the government people, at least to the Prime Minister, because she is talking much about female. Therefore, I think this at least the point form of this presentation must go to the go to the government section. Right, that's one thing. I propose that. And actually, Dr. Dharmi and Dr. Lakshman also pointed out some very valuable points. And I want to point out that Ms. Nilmini was talking about the poor labor uh, uh, of the female in Sri Lanka. Actually, one point I want to talk, because the education system also is involved in this one. In Sri Lanka, not like in Finland and other countries, the children are sent to long distance schools, colleges, because there are no equal facilities in schools. So from morning till evening, somebody from the parents must take part of the children to take them to the school buses and pick up them from school vans. There are so many activities where fathers can't take, because they have to travel and they have to do jobs. Therefore, especially in most of the families, female part, that's mothers, are doing that part. That is taking the children in the morning to the school vans, and then at 1:30 or 2:30 they have to go to the road to pick up the children. And other problem is in Sri Lanka, I think Ms. Nilmini knows that, because there are a lot of tuition going on. Not like other developed countries, from daily in the afternoon and weekends, the children have to attend the tuition classes. So in there also, somebody has to take the children to the tuition classes. In most cases, the mothers do that part, that job. So therefore, mothers don't have time to take the take time to support the labor forces in the country. That is one weak point in Sri Lanka. Therefore, I think our Prime Minister has a plan to change the curriculum system also in Sri Lanka. Therefore, in future, this may change, but at the moment, that problem is there. And other thing I want to ask Ms. Nilmini, I saw in your the list of topics, the climate change. I so that in your topic, I don't know whether you were going to talk about the poor activity or poor activity of female and children in the climate change, uh, about the climate change, but you didn't talk anything about climate change. There are also females are females have a big role, because as I'm a meteorologist, I know that the ozone layer uh, is mostly affected by the perfumes used by the females in the world, for Sri Lanka. So therefore, this is a very long problem. There were a lot of analyses done by during the last 30 years, and scientists have found the perfumes used by ladies are damaging the ozone layer. Therefore, more and more heat is coming through the ozone layer to the earth, and therefore that is one reason for the temperature of the earth to go up. So so that is scientific matter actually. That's not my analysis, that's the scientist analysis. So that's why I want to point out, Dr. Chula.
All
Again,
right, thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Kitsiri. I have Ranjan next. To anything to mention, Nilmini, or shall I ask?
If you go through all the questions, I'll probably come back on some of the
Okay,
questions
okay.
from different
So
people.
Ranjan is next. Thank you.
Nilmini, I compliment you on that detailed, very highly analytical presentation on the subject. First point, to me, it's very highly ironic that we had two executive heads of state. In fact, even closer than that, they were mother and daughter. But there is no record of them having done much to reduce the gap between the males and the females in various fields of human endeavor. Very, there is no record at all. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone of you, please correct me if I'm wrong. But there was so much that they could have done. First point. By contrast, I remember Hillary Clinton, when she was aspiring to be the president of the United States, she had two ambitions. One was, both are relevant to Sri Lanka. One was to emancipate women and give their due place, emancipate womankind the world over, not only in America, the whole world, to uplift the status of women. Just imagine the way their leaders think. The second important point, I wanted to talk about it, but I thought it should be taken up different as a subject by itself, is the need for reform of the party system. The second point she wanted to, ambition she had in mind was to reform the party system. The party system has shown many deficiencies and weaknesses and drawbacks in many countries, but that is not the subject we are discussing now, so I don't want to dwell on it. In Sri Lanka, coming back to this subject, I think Sri Lankan women have accomplished themselves very creditably in almost all fields. Almost all fields. For example, one. Recently, about a year or so back, Sri Lankan Airlines, the entire crew was 100% women. There wasn't a single man in the crew. They took a flight, Sri Lankan Airlines, full passengers from Sri Lanka to Bangkok. So what more than that? There wasn't a single man to help them. You see, it was 100% female crew, Sri Lankan Airlines. Similarly, another example, in the harbor, the gantries, there are women who operate those gantries. There are women today. And third example, some of the vocations that were exclusively held by men are now, you find women also doing that same work. For example, in motor car firms, there are a lot of mechanics, technicians, motor engineers in the workshop. Driving, some of those girls are so small compared to the cars that are available and on sale. You see, they're hardly visible when they're driving. I have seen them. They're hardly visible, but they're driving them very confidently. So I think women have accomplished themselves, but society has failed to accept them. Society has failed, and society being dominated by men. Today we are in a male-dominated society, so we have to ask ourselves why we won't give them a place. And the third point I have is about sexual harassment. My heavens, yes, it is. Women are not allowed to go about freely. You see, I have heard it being said in Japan, a young woman in her 90 can get down from her flat and cross the road and get herself a burger in the middle of the night. I think that's the best test of security for women, and that should be the standard benchmark for women all over the world. In Sri Lanka, it's unthinkable. In Sri Lanka, it's absolutely unthinkable, and it's pathetic. Some other men, how they force themselves on innocent, helpless families, poor families in villages. It's Nilmini, I think you should do a little study on that. You see how these young boys just force themselves on girls, poor women, helpless girls in villages where the parents are so helpless they can't help themselves. I have heard such stories. And Dharma, you are absolutely right. You see, the spas in Sri Lanka of late have proliferated. Whatever. It's alarming. It is my observation too. I'm so glad that you also observed this. You see, they are almost every 50 years there's a spa now in Sri Lanka. And you know what? People are silent. They're accepting it. Nobody is talking about it. You see, people are accepting it. The other day, I was reading about user reports about a hotel. It's on the internet. You see, these some 4 or 5 women as girls had stayed in this hotel, and they were commenting about how good or bad the hotel is, and they have very boldly said this, that they are taking 3 boys who were working there, you see, as stewards and so on. They mentioned them, you see, only names are not mentioned, and they were taking two. They have selected 3 boys out of the staff that helped them, served them along for their next stay in some other part of the country. Now, that kind of bold statement was unheard of, was unthinkable about 10 or even 10 years ago. So you can imagine the moral decline in standards. The government is unfortunately is placing a lot of emphasis on the development of the tourist industry. But I don't see much talk about agro industries, developing agro industries or other industries. There is so much that they can do. But unfairly, this government, they are very slow on the economic front, and this is going to be their Achilles heel in 3 years' time. With that, I stop. Thank you, Chula.
Okay, thank you, Ranjan. Because Nilmini is going to answer at the end, maybe I'll take Jiva now. Jiva, yes, Jiva.
Thank you, Chula. Thank you, Nilmini, for an excellent presentation. Just 2 quick points I wanted to point out. Both of us, we have talked about period poverty in the past. Unfortunately, our focus is misguided. What I mean is that, we think that the period poverty means lack of access to sanitary wear. That is not correct. I've been continuing this search in Sri Lanka. Sanitary ware is readily available. For example, a packet is only $147 to 200 rupees, which, according to the people I talk, quite affordable range. The problem is lack of knowledge about reproductive biology. Okay, that is the number one problem. I hope Lakshman will take note of this thing. I know a whole bunch of people who graduated from Peradeniya along with me. Some of them are doing physical sciences. They have no idea what reproductive biology is. So our education system has to fill in that somewhere, despite the terrible opposition from some of the religious leaders. The second one I want to point out is, about Kitsiri's comment about perfumes. To be exact, it's not the perfumes that's polluting the environment. It's the propellant that's used in some of the perfume products that's causing the problem. So let's be clear about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jiva, for that. And then let's see what Nilmini's got to say. Nilmini, yes, Nilmini.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for your commentary and also being concerned about the lot of women and girls in Sri Lanka. And it's heartening to know that you on the call share that concern. With regard to the point that a couple of you made, it is a male-dominated world. The entire world is dominated by men. And in some countries, that disparity is not so apparent. And certainly in the developed world, it's not so stark as in South Asia, for instance. But it's really important to try and start to redress this balance. And the point I was trying to make is that in Sri Lanka, we've got so much human potential. The human resources are magnificent because we've got a highly educated population. And as you all recognize, there are girls who are achieving incredibly well in higher studies as well. But it's puzzling that that's not being translated into the workforce. And that's the crux of the matter. The fact that only 30% of women are in work, in gainful employment. It is a ticking time bomb. This is by far the most important issue in this whole discussion, female labor force participation. So it's all very well doing well at their studies at school and then going on to study at universities and doing incredibly well and sometimes often better than the boys. And even girls now actually being encouraged to do subjects like physics. But the problem is the moment they get their sticker to put on the wall, then they're discouraged from going into work. And that's the problem. They're discouraged not only actively by their parents or their husbands, but they can't because of the way the whole of society works. And that's where we need to chip away at it. As I was saying earlier on, it's not about having these laws about night shift, where the employer has to go and get permission to employ a woman beyond the daylight hours. But it's about creating a safe environment where women can go to work, use public transport quite safely without fear. And the only way you can do that is to legislate, but then not only to legislate, making it an offense to harass a female in public transport, but also to give it teeth. Make sure that there are that's followed through with punitive action, with zero tolerance. Unless that happens, the problem is the whole legal system from a previous discussion we had seems to be broken because of these huge delays and whatever the endemic corruption that it exists within the legal system and within the police enforcement authorities, these things are not taken up and not enforced. So unless women can feel safe to get to work, to get to university and stay late, and I know one of you said that women tend to leave early. Why do they leave early? It's because if they leave any later, they'll be traveling in darkness and they could be at risk. So that's what we need to focus on, not actually getting permission to enable a woman to work outside of hours, but put the resources into making sure that it is safe for a woman to go to work. The other thing is just generally chip away at this approach of thinking of the male provider and woman's place is only in the home. If there's shared responsibility for child rearing, as there is in most developed parts of the world, then it isn't a matter of a woman should stay at home looking after the child. Women and men both parents should be participating in the rearing of the child. Both mother and father could be dropping the child off at school or for the tuition class or whatever. And then it's a holistic thing. It's not just about picking up the kid after tuition class. It's why should there be a need for tuition at all? If there's quality education available, then there wouldn't be a need for hours and hours and hours of tuition after school hours so that children are not exhausted still doing tuition at 9 o'clock at night. If there is enough investment, especially digital connectivity, and this is where where we're trying to focus at Solar Village SDG and trying to gradually introduce smart rooms, trying to make sure that even in rural villages, that children have access to IT, because that is a way of leapfrogging. That's an incredibly important way of making sure that there's a quality education for children. And the children are the future, to use a cliche. And so, unless there's enough investment in the rural areas, in the children's education, in girls' education, in making sure that not only that they're educated, but then they go on to be able to contribute to the family, in terms of the family income, but also to the economy. Unless we chip away at those old ideas, Sri Lanka has no hope. So this is why women and children must come first in this development. Sustainable development can only be achieved if we put attention, pour the attention onto making sure that there's an equal playing field for women, that there is hope for girls in the future. It seems to be gradually changing from what you've said. You were saying that back in the day there were no girls at all in your physics class at university, but there are now equal numbers. That's great, but let's now translate that into proper um, work opportunities for women, using those skills, using that knowledge, using those qualifications. But if only 30% of women are still in work because their place is the home only, then we can't advance. We cannot advance unless men take more of a role in shared responsibility for the child rearing, in picking up the kids from school, in helping them with their tuition. Unless that's happening, we can't go forward. So it's kind of doing away with the old mindset little by little. And in terms of what you said about the perfume, of course, there are many things that contribute to the effects of climate change. Fast fashion is a big problem. So in Sri Lanka, for example, the lack of recycling is a huge problem. So if there are more facilities that the government can put into place to make sure that waste is recycled, that clothes are recycled or upcycled, then we might see less damaging effects on the environment. But as somebody once said, clean Sri Lanka, how do we sort that out? Uh, but we need to actually sort out our own backyards, the garbage cans first. If we can try and tackle things like that, but more holistically, not just looking at one thing or the other, but moving forward bit by bit. And in terms of emancipating women, it's great that we've actually doubled the number of women representatives in Parliament from 5.3 to 10.3 or thereabouts. But it's still only a fraction of women representing the entire female population, and men, of course. But I mean, it should be an equal number of women in Parliament, but only 10%. That's not good enough. We need to improve those things. But going into politics has been seen as something a little bit untoward for a woman to be participating in Sri Lanka. That's the impression I get. We need to do away with that kind of approach. If we can understand that unless women have a role in shaping their own futures, unless women can contribute to the society, unless they can contribute to the family economically, not just in just doing care work, which could be shared, unless we change those attitudes, we'll keep our country repressed from growth. And that's why we need to focus on trying to liberate women in the workplace, make sure that it's not just about glass ceilings, because that seems to be the main problem in the West, for example. Women are fighting for equal pay, for equal work, complaining about the glass ceiling, that they can't go beyond a certain level. Those are true in Sri Lanka, but it's much more stark. But much bigger than that in Sri Lanka. You can't even get to work at all. So once we've addressed those issues, I think we can see a lot more Sri Lankan airlines manned or womaned by all-female crew. But it's really important to make sure that we do have more women in work. That's the critical thing. And if it
Okay.
requires affirmative action to do that, so be it.
Thank you, Nilmini, for that final message. We got it right through us. So I just want to update. I think, first of all, I have a request for you. The first one is you've studied the Sri Lankan weaknesses in the legal system that prevents women coming forward. So I think if you explore it a little bit more and if you can point it, this is where it is, this is how the laws should change, at least say 3 or 4 laws that is not quite compatible to 21st century, we may be able to make an impact by discussing it, why it should change and giving the altered thing. So I think you are more capable of doing that more than us. So if you can do that at some point, that will be useful. Number 2 is there was a request what we are doing. We're not just doing discussions, I must say. I don't always declare what I'm doing, but most of the time, most of these links that are relevant, if I get the contact details, I actually send to the relevant minister. So this might get through to the Prime Minister, as you said. So we just posted, but given the situation, somebody has to summarize it to them. It's not easy. They don't have the time. We don't have the time to go through a 2-hour video, but it does make an impact. And some of the feedbacks I need to tell as well. Now we talked about hybrid schools, learning platforms some time ago, and you'll be glad to hear that the government is now working to give smart training rooms to every school in the country, which is very good. I just heard from one of the principals that this is happening. So we may have made an impact to say how to do things. So it's important that we continue with the discussions and make yourself known in a way like, distributing all these links to relevant people if you have contact with them, because it may be that we are actually making an impact. Although it's slow, it's probably happening. So please go forward with that. Okay. Thank you very much for today's discussion. See you again, Nilmini. We like to hear from you.
Thank
Right.
you, Julian.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chula and all.
Good
Thank
night
you.
from Sri Lanka. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.